Welcome back to part three. So Jordan, Janet, you were asking a question before the break.
Right. He was talking about the Bitcoin and some of the problems that other people perceive in it, and some of the problems that you were talking about seemed very much just structural or in the form, the way that it's been built. And yet, is it a possibility that with some, finessing to that system, that it could remain a good system to use, an alternative to what we're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest problems is, what happens when your Bitcoins are lost, or what happens if they're stolen, or what happens if you send them to the wrong person. And, those are the sort of things right now where the system is so decentralized that there's really no way to get it back. It just kind of keeps going, and there's really nobody responsible for how it works or overseeing it. And so, that's, that combined with the price stability problem, in my view, are probably the two biggest barriers to adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can solve for those two, and they're certainly solvable, then you really have a system, and then you have something that starts to really work. The other one is the question of whether individuals, can anonymously run through the system or not. Like, is it something where, a fully decentralized system, it works just as well for the mafia and as it does for the IRS. You know what I mean? Like
the drug cartels and everything.
Right. And so,
like all the policies that we've implemented have stopped that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, it hasn't worked.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, that's really, those are the kind of questions that are crucial, but, they're political in nature. And, I think there's certainly a movement to do all this anonymously and to evade authorities and to become unstoppable. And, is that really the best way to do it? I'm not sure. When you look at at the global level, terrorism to whatever, underground, I'm not sure that's definitely the best way to go. But those are issues that will need to be addressed for sure. And I think it's commendable that, the central banks, like the Bank of England especially comes to mind. They've been extremely, and in the U.S. as well. They've really been, I think let's just say they could have been a lot harder on these systems coming out. They could have made them illegal outright and really made them impossible to use or illegal to use and completely killed the potential. And they haven't done that, so I think that's commendable. And obviously there's a movement towards integrating it within the current system, and that's a risk as well. But I think it's getting to the point where there's so many people working on it and interested in it that it's the potential to transcend these problems is becoming very, very real.
So tell us about what you think, in your opinion, would be a better system. How could we move forward and fix some of these major problems?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the book, you know what I mean? And, essentially, I do think that we need to move to fully digital currency, and that, will be global in nature. And I think that there's multiple ways that can emerge. It could come from the ground up. It can come from the top down. But it's certainly, however it emerges, it certainly is something that's of the people, by the people, for the people. Something
like our Constitution. How amazing is that?
And that that goes back to Roger's observation, is that I think that the vision of the founding fathers of America, the vision was always universal. And I think when you look at the life conditions, they really did the best to live these values in their life conditions. And as life conditions change, it's becoming to the point where I think also too that the nation state in the 20th century, America did the best they possibly could in that time to live those values. And we're just getting to another point where we need new structures to really take it to another level. And I think that the Constitution is one of the most wise and disruptive pieces of paper ever written, and it's just amazing. And it continues to inspire, and I think it will be extremely relevant for what is coming next.
So tell us what a digital dollar is. Describe that for us, and how would we benefit as citizens by having something like that?
So, I mean, basically, I think the digital dollar allows, if we'll call it a digital dollar.
Let's just call it a digital currency
I
then.
think what it means is like all the cash that you have right now is turned into, ones and zeros. So everything in the economy is accounted for digitally. Everything, every dollar is literally in a piece of software somewhere. And so, that allows a completely different system to emerge that allows you to employ negative rates if that's necessary, or a demurrage fee, which I think is could create a qualitatively different system that solves up the problems that we have currently. And it also allows, with central bank policy, it allows a direct relationship between the central bank and citizens. So that basically, if currency needs to be created, it could be completely created within the central bank, as opposed to rather than by financial institutions, by banks. So there's no, you could eliminate the fractional reserve system and basically have, exactly the amount of currency you need at any time, and issue new units to individuals rather than have banks create money out of thin air. And so, that process, I think, could be extremely attractive to a lot of people, really being a part of that system, and you would actually benefit from it if new currency units are issued. So it also brings up issues like, for example, when the chief economist at Citi a few weeks ago published a paper on this subject of, the potential to go digital and to employ negative rates. So, it's essentially what I was talking about in my book in 2009. And, the issue is that when people hear Citi saying that, it's like, no way. Like, we're not going to give you more control. We're not going to give Big Brother. I'm not going to give money to Big Brother so they can watch over me. And so it really creates an issue there. I mean, how much privacy do we have in our financial transactions? And, how do we want the relationship of government overseeing our money and how we spend it, and, that sort of thing. So, I don't have that answer today, but, it certainly brings up those issues. But, obviously with cryptocurrency, there are certainly ways that, their privacy could be maintained to some degree.
I'm listening to you talk, and it just seems like this whole system is insane. I mean,
the current system, you mean?
Yeah, I think that, China wants their currency to be a reserve currency in the U.S. and blah, 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 blah. But what's really going to transcend this whole thing is to get rid of all of it. Because behind each one of those pieces of paper that someone says has value, is the problem.
It's
right?
baggage.
It's like, well, my money is the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency, therefore it has more value than your currency over here. And one of the things, and I don't know that I asked you this last week, but maybe I did, but recently we've seen, I think it was Switzerland and then Costa Rica and some other countries unpegging their currency from the U.S. dollar, right? How is that affecting things, and what impact is that having?
I think Switzerland was depegging from the euro.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but there's also, I think talk also in the Middle East of depegging from the dollar in certain countries. And, does that have a dramatic effect on its own? No, but I think it's kind of like that movement away from the dollar. And I think that, I wouldn't say that's significant, but I think it's symbolic.
Let me go back to my point that I was making, because I don't think I finished it. Is that the only way we're really going to, as I see it and listening to you talk and reading what you've written, the only way I see that we can get out of this is to get rid of this nation's interest in my dollar, my currency being the reserve, and creating something that works for everyone everywhere. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, that's exactly what I think, and I agree. Technically, it really requires a different economic paradigm to do that, because having a single currency for everybody, that's most people's worst nightmare. You know what I mean? Because it's like, the one world government thing,
Sure.
and it's also, the limitations that has on very diverse economic regions. You can't have a single economic policy today for, Brazil and Greece or Germany. You know what I mean? Like even within the EU, that experiment has really shown how it's really difficult to have a single monetary policy for different countries. So you have to be able to transcend those problems, which is essentially a problem of how do you maintain interest rates, and how do you create a system that the money's flowing at a fairly stable velocity and at appropriate levels for to avoid inflation and to maintain stability. So demurrage, I think, has the potential to do that, and talk of a global currency without it is potentially dangerous. I think that's where we're moving either way. And, I think in this case, heaven and hell is, they say it's an inch apart, and it's going to be very true in this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, we could always go back to trading beads and get rid of money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm really intrigued with this concept of a circulation charge. That's essentially what demurrage is? Was that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a French term. So.
Yeah. So tell us more about that, because I think as I look at the paradigm that we're living in, and I look at some of the evolutionary leaps that are happening, as from an astrologer's point of view, or from some of the more metaphysical viewpoints, I mean, we are definitely moving toward that idea or concept of flow, that abundance has to flow, that money, that the systems that we've been putting in place have a way of stopping that. Or gathering more in some people's baskets and less in other people's baskets, where I think this idea of a circulation charge really moves us to the next level. So tell us a little more about that, and how could that work?
Yeah, it's a term that actually comes out of the shipping industry. And I think if you look at it, I think it's really helpful to think about it in shipping terms. It's effectively a fee that's applied on ships for if basically they have a certain amount of window to dock, move their goods, and leave, so allow the next ship to come in.
Oh, okay.
So essentially, like it's a systemic fee that ensures that there's a smooth, orderly movement throughout the global shipping industry. And that kind of fee applied to money is essentially ensuring that money, if you just hang on to it and hold on to it, or whatever, if you're not actually moving it, then there's a penalty that you incur. And that helps to bring stability and resilience into the system. And, if we think about it from a me first point of view, then it feels like a loss. It feels like something that's, not good for us. It's not in our best interest to do that. And if we think at it from the point of view of the whole, then it's absolutely makes sense. And so it's a challenge to the current way of thinking about economics. And
definitely.
And it's also received the endorsement of some of the greatest economists who have ever lived, and including some of the current ones. And so that's something that I think we're at a point right now where as we move towards a new system, it will become increasingly considered and talked about. And, I think, I think there's going to be practical reasons to actually have it, not just theoretical. And, every time I think about it too now, I think of Jean Houston's story that she tells about, she talks about heaven and hell, and how in hell, everybody is trying to feed themselves at the dinner table. They're all lined up. Everyone's around a dinner table trying to feed themselves, but the spoons are too long. So they're trying to do it, but they actually can't reach their mouths the way it's set up. And the way, in heaven, what they're doing is they're taking these spoons and they're feeding each other. That's, they have the problem solved. And, that's essentially the difference between demurrage and no demurrage in my mind. And, it's really showing how that can work for people.
Right.
You don't have to think of it as a startup. I think that, it has to actually solve problems for people in a real way and a pragmatic way. So I think from the ground up, it can really be a powerful way to do it.
So I have a question. Given the current state of economics in the world, and where we all would agree that things are, there's going to be an implosion at some point, or an explosion, whatever way you want to look at it. What would it make sense for people to say invest in gold and silver, for example, as a hedge against what might come? I mean, will those things have value if things just, ended tomorrow the way that we know it?
I think so. I think that certainly, a lot of people talk about, diversifying their portfolio out of equities entirely. Having diversified equities is one thing, but diversifying your portfolio to have gold and silver, maybe some physical cash as well, and real estate, really mixing it around, I think, makes sense. Because it's really hard to say how central banks will respond, whether inflation and deflation is a tension. And, I think, you just never know where things go. But I think that, with the relative buying, I think it's fairly certain that if what I'm talking about happens, then, we'll see a diminished purchasing power of the US dollar, in the world. And, the relative value of gold will certainly increase. And then, I think that, speaking of gold in particular, it's certainly been China's policy to acquire as much as possible in stealth. Russia as well. I mean, the two of them combined are on pace to buy more than 4,000 tons this year. And, that's not counting India, which is also an avid gold buyer. So, it's probably, it's high. It's more than is coming out of the ground. Let's put it that way.
So where are they buying it from?
That's a great question. I think that it's a very complex question. I think they're certainly buying it from central banks, other central banks. There's the way that the current gold system works. I think for more than three decades, and probably longer, there's been a concerted effort to keep the price of gold low, to increase the perception of the strength of the dollar. And the amount of actual gold that's traded, the physical gold, is only a fraction of what's actually traded. It's like so much of the transactions are paper gold, traded on the COMEX and in London, and that drives the price down. That increases the supply, but it might only be that a 20th of the transactions are actually physical gold. So the minute the demand for physical gold exceeds supply, the actual supply, we're going to see a spike. And on top of that, the Shanghai Gold Exchange is really designed, and the intention is to separate the price of paper gold from physical gold. So it's actually something the Chinese can do at a flip of a switch. And when that happens, I think it could go parabolic. It could triple quite easily and quickly. So yeah, I mean, if what I'm saying happens, for sure, if you think that there's potential for this to happen, I think owning some gold and silver makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
The other thing too is actually the digital, the potential for digital attacks and hacks. And, that's something that, when we're talking about a digital currency, needs to be solved. And decentralizing seems to be the way to solve that. But, in the last year, the majority of U.S. banks have been hacked by the Russians. There's been some significant breaches, and, there's potential that actually data could be lost, and that, our bank records are, manipulated or deleted or whatever it is. And so I don't think there's the risk of losing our money that way, but I think it could certainly shut down the system for a few weeks at some point. If that was the intention of Russia or China to do. So having physical cash probably makes sense.
Okay.
Could sure be used as a tool to get us to do what they want us to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
The world's insane, man. I'm telling you.
I was thinking, is there a place we can move like Canada before we move to Canada, right? Go to someplace safe. Someplace
those Canadians are really nice people.
It's safe because it's so cold.
Yeah.
Well, with global warming, who knows what that's going to be like in a few years.
Right.
Well, Jordan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us all about your books and so forth. Tell us a little more about resources if people are more interested in finding out more about this, what resources there are out there, and what's next for you in terms of when will this book come out possibly and that type of thing.
That's a good question. I'd say the book, hoping to complete it at the end of the summer. I think, hopefully we'll have it out by the end of the year, early next year. And, I guess what I'm planning to do is really, just keep writing. I've actually haven't been blogging for the last couple of years, but I plan to get that set up again at newcurrency.org in the near future. And, for myself, it's also looking at, the software side of it as well and seeing what I can play with there. And, I think there's a lot of opportunities in that space and it should be pretty exciting.
Newcurrency.org, that is your website?
It is. It's not up right now, but it should be up in the next month or so. I've been blogging there for a couple of years and then leave it up and plan to get back pretty soon.
Yeah. Well, you had to write a book. Important stuff.
It's very nonlinear, this work, different spaces at different times. And I just feel like this is, really getting called back into the currency space right now.
Good.
Yeah, very good. And I think this is information that the masses need to find out about,
Totally.
And be educated about.
Very much.
Yeah. Roger, any last words from you?
Well, I really appreciate being on the show and, I really enjoyed the conversation. It was nice to do it over a couple of weeks as well. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're glad that you could make the time for us and to talk about this because I think that it's probably right now the most important and pressing issue that we're facing, even though most people are probably unaware of it.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming on and sharing with all of us and
saying what needs to be said.
Right, and we'll probably have you back once your predictions come true. We'll have you back.
Yeah, I mean that's when these conversations, the upside to it is that's really when people open up and they'll really want to get into this and to make sure they're doing everything they can. So
yeah,
absolutely.
I think it's that's when we get real and it's the upside.
Well, the other thing too, especially here, I don't know how Canadians are, but here in the U.S., we're and I think you mentioned something in your book about Americans and resiliency and all the ability to handle things. But I really think that collectively we're reactive. So we'll wait till it all hits the fan, and then all of a sudden everybody will get on board and say, "Uh-oh, we have a problem. We need to fix it." So unfortunately, that's how we are, and so we're going to have to ride this one out and see what happens.
It reminds me of Japan after they attacked Pearl Harbor.
Absolutely, exactly.
Like we just woke up the sleeping giant.
Right.
And they really obviously they regretted it because when you piss off America or
right. Yeah.
I think, the citizens of your country. I've had the chance to live in America three times, and it's I think that it's a pretty special place, and it's in that essay, Roger, I talk about Churchill, who quipped that. America will do the right thing after they've exhausted all other options.
Yeah, that sums it up right there.
Something to be